Good afternoon, everyone. It's Dr. Gershon with another BetterHealth webinar. I am really thrilled today to be here with two outstanding leaders, Dr. Klein and Rama, who are representing a very, very diverse community of industry from biopharma and finance to psychology, leadership training, coaching, investing both in early stage and later stage companies, and myself as an entrepreneur and an investor through the venture studio and the venture fund, but also someone who's very involved on the selection committee of important accelerators. And we're here today in a very unique and kind of first run webinar to talk about leadership. And leadership in the sense that we want to be able to bring our collective knowledge and understanding of what great companies bring to investors and other entrepreneurs and to industry leaders that represents a clear green light to make investment and to help grow companies. And that is all about leadership. And we're going to talk about aspects of that leadership and what are the different components of leadership, particularly in this age of AI, where there is a very powerful technology which causes both tailwinds and headwinds for decision making at the top of every company and organization. So before I go in deeper and introduce you to these two really terrific people and leaders, as I do in every one of the webinars, I want to thank everyone for registering, for attending, and I want to encourage people to participate, to tell us where they're logging in from. And if they have a question that we can't get to in today's webinar, since it's a 30-minute discussion, please include your email and we will get back to you with an answer. The webinar really is a platform that comes out of our venture studio, which is a commitment to young entrepreneurs to help them grow through pre-seed all the way through to Series A. And in that process, we develop an open source platform through the webinar, which joins in with our hybrid symposiums and workshops to bring industry, investors, and emerging companies together in a focused effort to collaborate and partner. So within this structure, we have four pillars. One is we bring in emerging companies in early stage development, and we highlight their journey and their vision and their mission. And second, we bring in unicorns who have succeeded in large part in that journey, and we use them as case studies and templates. Companies like In Silico that have revolutionized drug discovery and drug development. Companies like Kindbody that have really let everyone know that women's healthcare is as important as any other sector in healthcare. We also highlight diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we're proud to showcase women CEOs and CEOs of color. And as part of our advisory team, we're very proud to announce Nancy Didia, who is an advisor on the board of Clinical Trial Hero, an advocate for 18 years at Boehringer Ingelheim, and now part of the Endeavor portfolio to champion diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then lastly, our conversation today, which is a high-level macro perspective on what are the important pressure points and touch points within the healthcare community? Where are we going, and how can we be futurists so that we know where the puck is going and skate to where it's going, not where it is now? So with that little preamble, I really am thrilled to be able to introduce you to first Dr. Merom Klein, and then second, Rama. So, Merom, can you please tell us a bit about yourself, your background, and then Rama, if you could do the same, we'll launch this very interesting discussion.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Martin. Yeah, so I've been in the leadership development field for for well over 30 years. And my specialty has been working with innovators, both in corporate roles who scout and see something promising and go, wow, we've got to have this, and then need to drive adoption to build a following within their own companies in order to get something adopted. That's been the mainstay of my work on leadership. And more recently, joining Keiretsu Forum and Mid Atlantic Bio Angels and some other angel groups, and advising some VCs in Israel, working with earlier stage companies that are partnering with those scouts in larger companies, both for pilots and eventually for acquisition that makes investors money from what they've invested in. And it's really what we've learned out of that is the two barriers to adoption are fear and inertia. And so the importance of courage is the antidote to fear. Comfort is not the antidote to fear if you want to get traction. Courage to face it and rise above it is the antidote to fear. And courage is also the antidote to inertia in order to build a sense of urgency and shift from isn't this an interesting concept of innovation to, man, we got to have this and we got to get action on it. So that's what my focus has been for 30 plus years. And it's been a great run.
Fantastic. Thank you for that overview. We're going to explore a lot of those layers after Rama introduces himself.
Thank you, Martin, for the honor and pleasure and privilege to participate today, and to the listeners. I come with a bit of a unusual background. I started off as an engineer, became a banker in the Middle East. In between, had a brain tumor and thought to myself, why on earth does it take so much time for drugs to come to patients? Ended up doing an MBA at INSEAD in France, and then joined Eli Lilly in Europe, and spent a lot of time in Lilly and Novartis. And I must confess that the 28 years I spent there did not get me closer to the answer. At least I knew where the pain points and issues were, but I didn't have the solution. And so Bloqcube is an attempt to be a small cog in the giant wheel of open intelligence, open source, to try to fix that. We're in the business really of accelerating clinical trials, but using innovation and trying to break through the old path and try to go where others have not gone. It took us, in fact, when I kind of decided to set it up, I had friends who told me, come on, Rama, why don't you just go and become a CFO of a biotech company and leave all this aside? And in a way, uh, Merom, and Martin, it was more like the point about courage that you talked about, and the passion that if you have the experience and you believe you have a solution, hey, we have one life only. Let's go find and make it happen. And that's how Bloqcube came together. The other part of the Bloqcube journey is that it is unusual that people start, after having a corporate career. But I just thought strongly that the probability of success is actually accentuated because you've seen as an executive quite a lot of the challenges that most entrepreneurs go through. So it gives me a bit of an edge. The second part is that I think any organization has to be built with talented people, and finding talented people to come and be wedded with passion to the vision is part of the challenge. And that's what we have tried to do. In fact, we were so early that in 2020, just before COVID hit, the digital innovation officer of a very large company. He said, Rama, I don't know what to do with you guys because you built a 2025 system in 2020. And while that was great to hear, no, that doesn't help cash flows. And COVID then came along. And that's something that created a headwind for digital innovation industry. And that wave still continues. I think the other point I'd like to address also, Merom, is the point on barriers. Coincidentally, just last month, Martin was there at a dinner engagement where we discussed barriers to innovation in clinical trials. And Tufts BSDT has a great study that talks about it taking 5.8 to 6.8 years. So it goes back to what, Martin, you said earlier on, that our patients and our industry need some forms of open source solutions. I use open source in a very broad way, one in which we synergize, one in which we accrete, and one in which we develop jointly, if required, or co-opt solutions to make it happen. And the long-term vision, of course, is not to see patients as consumers of healthcare, but how can they be participants, developers, influencers, and potentially, producers of healthcare.
No, that's
I'd
good.
like to test a hypothesis with
Sure.
you, because there are a lot of really good AI solutions and innovations. I would think that what gives your venture an edge is you've been an advisor, a mentor, a financial a financial expert in the pharma industry. And so you have an ability to understand how technology, how it is adopted, and the kind of questions that your customers, if they're smart, they should be asking to be courageous about adoption.
Mm-hmm.
That you have the ability to make them more courageous and more intelligent about adopting a solution like yours. So it's the technology, but it's the culture and ability to drive adoption. I would think that your background really gives you an edge to be able to push forward.
I think that's a great point, Meryl. I would suggest that there would be potentially three parts to that. The first part is, again, not letting the cart get before the horse, namely choosing technology and say, hey, I'm going for generative AI or chat GPT because it's so cool. And now let me look for a problem to apply it. And I think we've got to reverse that and say, I have a problem that I'm not too sure on patient recruitment. Can I build a recommendatory AI model that can select that? Or I have a challenge in terms of probability of success in drug discovery or molecules that are coming. Is there an open source database or can I create to do that? So it's again identifying the pain point very clearly and then applying it. The second part of the solution also is being respectful about the workflows that are there for execution. And I say that not because they are made of cast iron, but they're not elastic as rubber bands go. We've got to recognize that we live in a regulatory world and some of the workflows have a good reason. So, how do you mix and match technology with workflows to make it a better place for the scientist or the clinician? You know, becomes the second part of the challenge. The third part is, I think, a little more complex, I guess, which happens with all, I guess, entrepreneurs, is looking for those early adopters so you can seed them in terms of the famous adoption curve. So then they can be your reference customers. I think it's a bit of one of all those three coming together, if you don't mind my saying so.
Absolutely. And then when you've got the early adopters, if you're an innovation leader, you've got to be building their courage to drive adoption.
Right.
If they only become early adopters and they have interest, and that's where it stops,
Right.
you're not going to get adoption. You've got to be able to convert them into champions
Right.
And again, if they're not on the pain point, I'm so glad that you said that, because if you're so dazzled with your own technology that you're not tuned in and listening and asking the right questions
Right.
about that,
Right.
and having people on your board and your advisors
Right.
who have your kind of background and have walked in those shoes and understand it, you
Right.
you're not going to be able to move that forward and really turn them into champions.
Let
And
me let me frame this a little bit in terms of how I spent my Monday, which was part of the selection committee that I'm on for Techstars.
Mhm.
Now, these are the best and the brightest companies, one of the best accelerators in the world. How do we make decisions about who we invest in as a selection committee? So I want to dial down, from these personal experiences that you both have, brought forth here, which are very powerful, to something that is perhaps close at hand for young CEOs. What are the key points that we're looking for that defines leadership? So we've talked about some of them, but I want to frame it in an action-oriented kind of rubric. So things that are important in terms of leadership are the recognition that it is critically important to be able to hear other people's points of view,
Mhm.
the ability to listen, to take in what you hear, and then have a community of collaborators or partners or advisors to be able to digest that on a weighted basis,
Yeah.
make good decisions.
Yeah. So, Martin, you just defined two of the five factors we look for. One is ask and openness, and the second is align and ability to create a community that's putting we ahead of me. Keep going.
Yeah, so part of the Techstars mantra is, give first. And so I think that, this is an era that's extremely exciting for all of us because there's an opportunity to solve problems that are very
Right.
complex. Complex problems need collaboration and partners to come to the table. And so what we look for in the venture studio and in the venture fund, and what I would say is in large part in the selection committee, is leadership that recognizes that it's not just the wow of the innovation that is going to drive your company to success. First, you have to be a CEO with vision and you have to have a mission driven component. Second, you have to be able to have the innovation that acts as a tool. And third, you have to be able to have the team that is enrolled in your vision and will strive with persistence, with resilience, with grit to adapt to any changes, to listen to potential industry partners, to pivot, grow, rinse, and repeat. These are the things that I want to talk about, which is the notion that there is a long game that's embedded in the word leadership.
Yeah.
And that long game is about having the vision and the strength and the courage to listen to what others are saying, not blindly accept it, but on a weighted basis, judge it as it reflects on your vision. And Rama, you talked about an article in the newspaper today, which is
Right.
about Elon Musk. I would love for you to talk about that as a former CFO of Novartis in two geographies. This article reflects, I think, close, at home for you, some of the decisions that are being made in the C-suite for CFOs.
I think, Martin, that's a good segue into what struck me today when I read the Wall Street Journal was that the current CFO of Elon Musk's organization resigned and is being replaced by his colleague, comes from an accounting background. But in the article, what they focused on was not his brilliance in finance or cutting costs, which I think is kind of like entry ticket to a senior role in any case, but more for his soft-spoken ability to interpret and influence what Elon Musk was wanting with his employers, which are his colleagues, as well as with the analyst community. And that ability to be a bridge and be a strategic sounding board is so vital for success of any organization. Now, I've been very fortunate to have worked at Novartis, which is an outstanding organization, where very often CFOs were expected to jump into the time point when CEOs would rotate out of their assignments. That was not given because I had stars on my shoulder, or basically was the plan of action, but it had to be earned. And the earning would come through when you'd understand the business as good, if not better, but we also be able to give insights which would then help both the business and the business unit leaders grow. And that goes back, Martin, to your earlier point about the collaborative nature of enterprise. And to me, if I were a young CFO or a young CEO in one of these entrepreneurial companies, I definitely would read that article on B1 page of the Wall Street Journal of how well
Rama,
it's captured.
yeah, I mean, that's a great thought as well. I mean, we run into this a lot of times when we're advising investors that you have a
Mhm.
brilliant visionary CEO and they get the vision, but they lack the business acumen to really be the bridge to investors or the bridge to
Mhm.
buyers that are making a financial decision
Mhm.
about whether to adopt or not adopt or acquire or
Mhm.
not acquire. And if they partner with a CFO, a really sharp CFO that
Mhm.
can be that bridge for them, I mean, that often is what we advise them as leadership coaches
Right.
is, it play the superpower that's yours,
Right.
but recognize the superpower you're missing and
Right.
bring that into your team. And if you bring in the CFO that's going to know how to do that translation and know how to sharpen that business case and know how to really turn that up, you're going to be better together. It's going to have a multiplier effect, not just an additive effect.
In fact, if I could just build on that and extend it to the C suite for a moment. And I struggle with this because I'm not a scientific expert, but one of my right hands is a gentleman who's been with, been my colleague in Novartis who handles our scientific and regulatory affairs. And the beauty is that I've got the business person's 80/20 approach to whatever I do, and he has the 99.9% approach. So we do have a creative conflict from time to time, but it goes back to what I think the role of a CEO in an entrepreneurship organization is always getting or hiring or putting people in place who are far better than them in different areas.
Yeah.
So, like he's there, I've got a pricing person who's also an expert, but equally being willing to listen and also tailor advice. That goes back to the point of courage that you mentioned and leadership, Martin, that you
Yeah.
mentioned. So it's
And
that
and you
kind of
mentioned, yeah,
process.
and you
Let me,
mentioned
let me take one
conflict as
second,
well.
Merom. Let me
Yeah.
take 1 second and just frame this. So, a lot of what we do at Endeavor is digital health. A lot of what's happening in digital health is AI, machine learning. I want to focus the conversation on that. So,
Okay.
the intersection between technology and human decision making is critical. Really, the point of this conversation is the urgency that is now here in digital health companies. More and more AI and machine learning and eventually deep learning is going to spin out, into quantum computing, which is going to be 151 million times faster than the current supercomputer. Now, this technology has a headwind and a tailwind to it. It has a risk and a benefit. My opinion, and I think the point of this conversation for me, is to recognize that leaders use technology as tools, but must understand that that tool has to be balanced against good human intuition and judgment, which is only strengthened through collaboration and partnerships. And so the ethical use of AI and the important understanding of how AI is used, where that data is gathered, what the insights are gained, and the validity of those insights, and how to use that information for drug discovery, for drug development, for analyzing important electronic healthcare records, for predictive value for diagnostic tests. All of these filter eventually to the CEO, who
Yeah.
has to make a decision as a leader. How courageous am I going to be able to challenge this innovation?
Yeah.
How courageous am I going to be to bring people in to question the validity of those insights?
Yeah, Martin,
How
let me
aggressive am I going to be in terms of making statements about the extent to which this can change patients' lives is balanced, in an ongoing and ever kind of decision-making process.
Martin,
And
I think that the key, I mean, you talked about the courage of the leader to take decisions. And I want to come back to a word that Rama used, which is conflict. Because with the quantum computing and the increased power of AI, you're going to have data challenging assumptions and challenging hypotheses and actually creating more conflict in organizations rather than less.
right.
And it's the leader's ability to be conflict smart and conflict savvy and know how to facilitate that, so that it's not the leader taking in all the information and then going, okay, here's my decision. It's about the leader being able to bring the issues to a head, facilitate the right conflict, and then drawing on the wisdom of the group so that a solution emerges and it's got buy-in
Yeah.
as the right solution comes in. And that's why I think, Rama, what you said about conflict is so important.
And the conflict came actually on the application AI. So just quickly, that your listeners might find, we were asked in a very short order to code for a study, and we were obviously conflicted about it. Long story short, I went to ChatGPT 4 and I was able to find roughly what were the prices at which people had done those studies in whatever X years. So give me a price range. Then I went to my pricing person and my colleague, as well as my regulatory colleague, and said, now let's try to figure out a template for it. And the net result is the code that we offered was in that band, but it was built with factors, very specific elements. So different people, going back to your point, we've had some heated arguments in that short period, but different people, going back to your point, Martin, of the application of AI in healthcare, I think if I had to put that RFP together, the response to the RFP together a year back, I couldn't have done it in 1 week. We did it in 1 week. We templated it with ChatGPT 4. We got a price range from ChatGPT 4. We built our SaaS structure with very good reasons through that. So the point I want to make is not how smart we were, but more to your point that as you apply AI in healthcare, there are some powerful tools and levers that can make the grunt work easier, but it does not take away the need for courage that you're saying of where you want to pitch it, nor does it take away the need for constructive conflict and collaboration with your peers to get an optimal solution that you can work with. And this is just a very small instance. Then, when you start layering it in for other places where AI has been thought of, then it gets a little more kind of cooler, because I cannot imagine tomorrow if we do gene editing, as has been talked about with CRISPR, without combining the tools, Martin, that you were talking about. You know, so it's such an exciting time. I can't tell you that we are only limited by our ability to take on technology and listen to our colleagues in terms of the way forward.
No,
Rama,
absolutely.
yeah. again, I think you illustrate, I mean, before we went live, I was saying in Hebrew, we have a couple of different expressions for courage. And one is chutzpah, or ometz, of force and pushing things forward. And the other is ometz lev, which translates to strength of heart. And it's what a family member gives to a patient so that they have the courage to endure a therapy or endure something difficult. And what you talked about developing that proposal, if I'm a soft-spoken, coming from a culture where if I'm not in authority, I keep my voice low and wait for an invitation kind of culture, it takes a lot of courage for me to speak up and get into the heat of that debate.
Yeah.
And I need leaders around me, not just that have the chutzpah to push themselves forward, but have the ometz lev to raise the level of courage of everyone in the room and everyone in the discussion. And that's how you make much better decisions and how you drive adoption more intelligent.
Awesome. I've learned so much from both of you just today in this 20 minutes. 30 minutes.
I want to take a second to thank everyone who's dialed in. Harvey, thank you so much. Jolene, thank you for dialing in today. Wambezo, thank you for joining us today. Jukum, thank you so much. Rip, Howard, and of course, Jenny, who's dialing in from Italy today. Thank you all for participating in the first leadership conversation, which we hope will extend out on a quarterly basis to leadership discussions, which are practically focused, where CEOs and people who are entrepreneurs and founders can think about what does leadership mean, what is important in terms of the investors who are looking at making decisions about investment and the leadership that they feel is paramount in their investment decision. What is it that you as a leader can bring to other CEOs and entrepreneurs in your community? And I think if I could get kind of somewhat forward looking, what I see in the next 10 plus years is a hyper growth area within healthcare. And healthcare is one of the most personal aspects of our lives. As a physician and as a patient, occasionally, I know that health is an under-recognized part of everyone's life until that point when they need healthcare. What I can say is that over the 23 years in which I've been doing this, I have never seen such an incredible intersection of science, medicine, technology, and leadership come together. And I am thrilled to be able to open this leadership conversation with two real leaders. Thank you so much, Merom. Thank you so much, Rama, for taking the time out to share some of your insights. And I look forward to having you back soon.
Thank you.
Thanks,
The
Martin.
honor.
Thanks, Rama.
Thanks, Merom. We'll be in touch.
Okay.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone, again for dialing in. Rama and Merom, please stand on for a couple of moments while I sign off.